Black Janitor heads home after work, unaware CEO is following him. What she sees changes everything. Elena Whitmore's heels clicked against the marble floor of the 42nd floor like a metronome counting down to midnight. At 38, she commanded Whitmore Industries with the same ruthless efficiency that had built her late father's empire. But tonight something felt different. The glass walls of her corner office reflected her silhouette, sharp blazer, pulled back auburn hair, and eyes that rarely softened anymore. "Another 16-hour day," she muttered, gathering files from her mahogany desk. The city sprawled below like a circuit board, millions of lights representing lives she never thought about. That was the problem with being at the top. You stopped seeing the people who kept everything running. The executive floor had emptied hours ago, leaving only the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner somewhere in the building's depths. Elena paused, listening to that rhythmic whirring. It reminded her that even at this hour, someone was working to keep her world pristine. She noticed him before, the janitor who moved through the hallways like a ghost. Tall, probably in his early 40s, with calloused hands and eyes that never quite met anyone's gaze. He wore the same navy blue uniform every night, pushing his cart with mechanical precision, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces that most people never appreciated. What struck her wasn't his presence, but his absence. The way he seemed to fade into the background, invisible to the executives who stayed late, transparent to the security guards who nodded without really seeing him. Elena had built her career on reading people, on understanding what motivated them, what drove them, but this man was a closed book written in a language she'd never learned. "Elena, you're still here?" Marcus Kellerman's voice cut through her thoughts. The VP of Operations strode toward her, loosening his tie with the satisfied air of someone who just closed a major deal. "Thought you'd have headed home by now." "Could say the same about you," she replied, not looking up from her papers. Marcus chuckled, leaning against her doorframe. "Just finished reviewing the quarterly reports. Revenue's up 18%, your father would be proud." He glanced around the empty hallway. "You know, I was just thinking about efficiency. Take that janitor guy, what's his name, Tom something? Perfect example of how these people just clock in and out. No ambition, no drive to better themselves. Just grateful to have a job, I suppose." Elena's pen stopped mid-signature. Something about Marcus's casual dismissal rankled her in a way she couldn't quite identify. "These people? You know what I mean," Marcus continued, oblivious to the edge in her voice. "Simple folks. Different priorities. They're not wired like us, always thinking about the next promotion, the next opportunity. They just want their paycheck and to go home to, whatever it is they go home to." The vacuum cleaner's hum grew closer, and Elena watched as the janitor, Thomas, she now remembered from the employee directory, appeared at the far end of the hallway. He moved with quiet purpose, head down, focused on his work. When he noticed them talking, he paused, seemed to consider changing his route, then continued with determined professionalism. "Evening, Thomas," Elena said suddenly, surprising herself. He looked up, startled. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Elena saw something unexpected: intelligence, wariness, and a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. "Good evening, Ms. Whitmore," he replied, his voice careful and measured. Marcus barely acknowledged the greeting, already turning back to Elena. "Anyway, I should head out. Jennifer's threatening to lock me out if I miss another dinner." He laughed at his own joke and walked away, leaving Elena standing in her doorway. Thomas had resumed his work, but Elena found herself watching him. The way he moved wasn't mindless. It was efficient, economical, like someone who'd learned to waste neither time nor energy. He cleaned around an expensive sculpture without touching it, navigated between chairs without disturbing their arrangement, and somehow managed to make the already pristine hallway even more spotless. When he finished the executive floor, Thomas packed his cart with the same methodical care he applied to everything else. Elena retreated to her office, but positioned herself where she could observe him through her glass walls. She watched him take the service elevator down, probably heading to other floors, other invisible tasks that kept her world functioning. An hour later, as Elena finally prepared to leave, she encountered Thomas again in the lobby. He was changing out of his uniform in a small alcove near the security desk, pulling on a worn leather jacket that had seen better decades. His work badge disappeared into his pocket, and with it, his official existence in her world. Elena hung back, suddenly struck by a realization that felt almost absurd. She had no idea who this man was beyond these walls. Marcus's dismissive words echoed in her mind. Whatever it is they go home to. And she found herself genuinely curious. What did Thomas Reed go home to? What kind of life did someone like him lead? The questions felt foreign in her mind. Elena Whitmore didn't wonder about employees' personal lives. She dealt in quarterly reports, market projections, and board meetings. But as she watched Thomas push through the revolving door into the October night, something shifted inside her, a crack in the carefully constructed walls that separated her world from everyone else's. On impulse, Elena grabbed her coat and followed. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and car exhaust. Thomas was already halfway down the block, walking with the same purposeful stride he used in the office hallways. Elena kept her distance, feeling ridiculous but unable to stop herself. What was she doing? Following an employee home like some kind of corporate stalker? But something Marcus had said bothered her, the casual assumption that people like Thomas lacked ambition or drive. Elena had built her entire worldview on the belief that success came to those who worked for it, that everyone had equal opportunity to climb the ladder. Yet watching this man who worked nights to keep her building immaculate, she realized she never once considered what ladder he might be trying to climb, or whether he'd even been given access to one. As Thomas turned down a side street, Elena made a decision that would change both of their lives. She quickened her pace, following the man she'd never really seen into a world she'd never imagined existed. The city looked different from street level, she realized. Less like a circuit board and more like a living, breathing organism full of stories she'd never thought to read. Elena's designer heels weren't made for sidewalk surveillance. After 3 blocks, she regretted not changing into sneakers, but stopping now would mean losing Thomas, who moved through the darkening streets with surprising speed. The gleaming business district gave way to older buildings, then to neighborhoods where streetlights flickered and some didn't work at all. She watched Thomas's transformation with growing fascination. The withdrawn, careful man from the office hallways had shifted into someone alert and aware. His shoulders straightened, his head lifted, and his eyes constantly scanned the shadows between buildings. This wasn't paranoia. This was survival instinct honed by experience. "Hey, Tommy!" A voice called from a stoop where 3 men sat sharing a bottle wrapped in brown paper. "Working late again?" Thomas raised his hand in acknowledgement but didn't slow down. "Every night, Marcus. You boys stay out of trouble." One of the men laughed. "Trouble's got to catch us first." Elena ducked behind a parked car, heart pounding. She felt like an intruder in this world, a tourist gawking at lives she never had to live. The conversation revealed something unexpected. Thomas wasn't just passing through this neighborhood. He belonged here, was known here, respected here. As they walked deeper into the area, Elena noticed details that made her stomach clench. Boarded-up storefronts with "For Lease" signs that looked years old. A playground with broken swings and graffiti-covered equipment. Children's toys scattered in front yards that needed mowing, next to cars that probably hadn't run in months. Thomas stopped at a corner bodega with barred windows and neon signs advertising lottery tickets and check cashing. Elena positioned herself across the street, pretending to examine her phone while watching through the store's grimy windows. What she saw made her chest tighten. Thomas stood at the counter with a small basket containing exactly 4 items: a loaf of white bread, a gallon of milk, a jar of peanut butter, and a package of instant noodles. But it was how he paid that shattered something inside Elena's carefully constructed worldview. He pulled crumpled bills from different pockets, a 5 from his jacket, 3 ones from his pants, quarters from his shirt pocket. She watched him count and recount, his lips moving silently as he calculated. The cashier, an elderly man with kind eyes, waited patiently while Thomas counted out exact change, down to the pennies. "That's $7.43, Tommy," the cashier said gently. Thomas counted again, came up short, and reluctantly put back the peanut butter. "Just these 3 then, Mr. Hassan." Elena's hand moved instinctively toward her purse, where she kept more cash than Thomas probably made in a week. But something stopped her, the dignity in Thomas's posture, the careful way he handled the transaction. This wasn't about money. This was about a man doing what he could with what he had. 15 minutes later, Elena followed Thomas down a street where half the houses looked abandoned. He stopped at a 2-story duplex that had seen better decades. Paint peeled from its siding like old skin, and one of the front steps sagged dangerously. The small yard was neat but bare, except for a bicycle with training wheels lying on its side. Elena expected Thomas to climb the steps alone, maybe call out a quiet "I'm home" to a spouse or roommate. She expected the quiet end to a quiet man's quiet day. She wasn't prepared for what happened next. The front door exploded open before Thomas even reached the porch. 5 children burst out like puppies, ranging from what looked like 16 down to maybe 6 years old. They surrounded him with squeals of, "Uncle Tommy!" and "You're home!" and "Did you bring anything?" Elena's breath caught in her throat. Uncle Tommy? The transformation was instantaneous and profound. The invisible janitor disappeared completely, replaced by a man whose face lit up with pure joy. He scooped up the smallest child, a girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin, and spun her around while the others grabbed at his jacket and shopping bag. "Easy, easy," he laughed, his voice warmer than Elena had ever heard it. "Let me get inside before the neighbors think I'm being attacked by tiny monsters." Through the duplex front window, Elena watched the evening unfold like a movie she'd never seen before. Thomas helped an older boy, maybe 14, with homework at a kitchen table covered in school papers and textbooks. He made dinner with the ingredients he'd bought, stretching the instant noodles with vegetables that must have already been in the house. When the youngest girl had a meltdown about something, Elena couldn't hear what. Thomas knelt down to her level, speaking softly until her tears stopped. He braided another girl's hair while listening to a boy practice reading aloud, stumbling over words that Thomas patiently helped him sound out. This wasn't a man without ambition, as Marcus had suggested. This was a man whose every ambition centered on the 5 children who called him Uncle Tommy. Elena watched him move between homework help, dinner preparation, and settling minor disputes with the fluid grace of someone who'd been doing this alone for a long time. As the children finally settled down for the night, Elena saw Thomas collapse into a threadbare armchair. Even from across the street, she could see the exhaustion that pulled at his shoulders, the weight of responsibility that never lifted. He sat for maybe 5 minutes, eyes closed, before getting up to wash dishes and prepare for whatever tomorrow would bring. Elena stood in the darkness, completely unprepared for the emotions flooding through her. This man wasn't invisible because he lacked presence. He was invisible because people like her had chosen not to see him. Elena's penthouse apartment felt like a museum when she finally arrived home at 2 a.m. 30 floors above the city, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that cost more than most people's annual salaries, she stood in her marble foyer and felt utterly hollow. The silence was deafening. No children's laughter echoing through the halls, no homework scattered across kitchen tables, no one calling her name with genuine joy. Just the hum of expensive appliances and the distant sound of traffic far below. She poured herself a glass of wine, a bottle that cost more than Thomas had spent on groceries, and sank into her leather sectional. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw those 5 children rushing toward their Uncle Tommy, saw the way his face had transformed from invisible employee to beloved guardian. When was the last time someone's face lit up when I walked into a room? The question came unbidden, followed by a parade of memories she'd spent years avoiding. Her own childhood in the Whitmore mansion, 14 rooms that always felt empty despite the live-in staff. Her father, Richard Whitmore, buried behind newspapers at breakfast, discussing quarterly projections instead of asking about her school day. Her mother, Catherine, floating through their lives like an elegant ghost, more concerned with charity galas than the daughter who ate dinner alone most nights. Elena doesn't need coddling. She remembered her father saying to a nanny who'd suggested more family time. The sooner she learns that success requires sacrifice, the better. Besides, she has everything she could want. Everything except what those 5 children had. Someone who rushed home to them. Someone whose day revolved around their needs. Someone who counted pennies to buy them bread and milk. Elena had been 12 when she asked her father why their gardener, Mr. Rodriguez, always looked so tired. Because some people work with their hands, Elena, and others work with their minds. We're fortunate to be in the second category. He'd returned to his papers, dismissing both her question and Mr. Rodriguez's humanity in one efficient motion. She'd never questioned that logic until tonight. Sleep eluded her completely. At 6 a.m., Elena gave up and headed to the office early, hoping work would distract her from the images burned into her memory. But as she walked through the building's lobby, every detail felt different. The security guard who greeted her, did he have children waiting at home? The woman restocking the newsstand, what was her story? By 8 a.m., the executive floors buzzed with familiar energy. Meetings, phone calls, the comfortable rhythm of high-level decision-making. Elena tried to lose herself in quarterly projections and market analyses, but her concentration shattered every time she glimpsed Thomas in the hallway. He'd arrived early to handle day-shift cleaning duties, moving through the offices with the same mechanical efficiency she'd observed before. But now Elena saw the careful way he navigated around groups of executives, how he seemed to shrink himself to avoid taking up space that wasn't his. "Excuse me," she heard Marcus tell Thomas, not looking up from his phone as Thomas tried to empty the trash bin beside his desk. Marcus didn't move his feet, forcing Thomas to work around him like he was furniture. Elena watched Sarachin from accounting walk past Thomas without acknowledgement, even though he'd moved aside to let her pass. She observed how conversation stopped when Thomas entered a room, not out of respect, but because people simply didn't register his presence as requiring social awareness. How long has this been happening right in front of me? Unable to concentrate, Elena called her assistant. "Linda, I need you to pull an employee file for me. Thomas Reed, Facilities Department." 20 minutes later, the thin folder landed on her desk with a soft thud that somehow felt like an indictment. Elena opened it with the strange sensation that she was violating something sacred. The facts were stark. Thomas Reed, 43 years old. High school diploma. Started as night janitor 5 years ago. Salary, $28,000 annually. No health insurance. He declined the company plan, probably because he couldn't afford his portion of the premiums. Perfect attendance record. 0 disciplinary actions. No emergency contacts listed except a sister, Sandra Reed, deceased as of 14 months ago. No mention of dependents. No indication that this man was single-handedly raising 5 children on poverty wages while keeping her building spotless every night. Elena stared at the folder until the numbers blurred. $28,000. She'd spent more than that on her last vacation. The watch on her wrist cost half of Thomas's annual salary, and she'd bought it without thinking twice. Why doesn't he ask for help? Why doesn't he apply for promotions? Request a raise? But even as the questions formed, Elena realized how naive they were. What was Thomas supposed to say? That he was caring for his deceased sister's children without legal documentation? That he couldn't afford to miss work for interviews or training programs? That he needed this job too desperately to risk asking for anything that might seem like special treatment? She thought about the way he'd put back the peanut butter, counting out exact change while maintaining his dignity. Men like Thomas didn't ask for help. They adapted, they sacrificed, they made impossible situations work through sheer determination. "Ms. Whitmore?" Linda's voice came through the intercom. "Your 10 a.m. is here." Elena closed the file, but couldn't close the questions multiplying in her mind. How many other employees carried invisible burdens? How many lives was she responsible for without ever knowing it? And what did it mean that she'd built her success on the labor of people she'd never bothered to see? As she prepared for her meeting, Elena caught her reflection in the window. She looked exactly like her father, confident, successful, completely insulated from the human cost of her comfort. For the first time in her adult life, that resemblance didn't feel like a compliment. Elena couldn't concentrate on spreadsheets when human faces kept invading her thoughts. By lunch, she made a decision that would have seemed impossible 48 hours earlier. She walked down to the HR department, something she hadn't done personally in years. "Ms. Whitmore!" Janet Morrison, head of human resources, nearly spilled her coffee. "What brings you down to our humble corner?" "I need to discuss an employee situation confidentially," Elena said, closing Janet's office door behind her. "Thomas Reed from Facilities." Janet's expression grew guarded. "Has there been a complaint?" "Because Thomas has an exemplary record." "No complaint. I need to understand his situation better. His file mentions a deceased sister but no dependents." "Yet," Elena hesitated, realizing how her surveillance would sound. "I have reason to believe he's caring for children." Janet's face went pale. She opened her desk drawer, pulled out a thick file, and set it down like it contained explosives. "Ms. Whitmore, what I'm about to tell you, it's complicated. Uncomplicated." Janet took a deep breath. "Sandra Reed died 14 months ago. Overdose. She was raising 5 kids alone in Riverside, that's about 20 minutes from where Thomas lives now. When she died, Child Protective Services was going to split the children up, place them in different foster homes." Elena's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "Thomas fought for custody. Quit his day job, took the night position here so he could be home with them during the day and evening. He moved them out of Riverside immediately, said it wasn't safe for kids. Why isn't any of this in his file?" Janet looked uncomfortable. "He asked us not to document it. See, Thomas doesn't have legal guardianship yet, the court proceedings are still ongoing. He was afraid that if the company knew about the children, we might consider him unreliable or a liability. He needs this job, Ms. Whitmore. Desperately." Elena stared at the file. "You said Sandra was in Riverside. Refresh my memory, what's the situation there?" Janet's expression darkened. "Economic disaster. Used to be a thriving working-class neighborhood until..." She paused, studying Elena's face carefully. "Until what?" "Until Whitmore Industries closed the electronics plant there 6 years ago. 1,500 jobs disappeared overnight. The neighborhood never recovered. Property values crashed, businesses closed, people couldn't afford to leave. That's when the drug problems really took hold." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She remembered that decision. It had been one of her first major cost-cutting measures after taking over from her father. The Riverside plant was underperforming, the profit margins too slim. She'd moved production overseas and saved the company millions annually. "Ms. Whitmore? Are you all right?" Elena's hands were shaking. "Sandra Reed, what did she do before she died?" Janet consulted the file reluctantly. "She worked at the Riverside plant. Assembly line. When it closed, she couldn't find steady work. Took temp jobs, retail positions that barely covered rent. According to Thomas, she started using drugs to cope with working 16-hour days and still falling behind on bills. The overdose was accidental. She was just trying to stay awake for a double shift." The room spun around Elena. She had killed Sandra Reed. Not directly, not intentionally, but her signature on those closure documents had set in motion the chain of events that destroyed that woman's life and orphaned 5 children. "Does Thomas know?" she whispered. "About the plant closure connection?" I don't know. He's never mentioned it, but he's not stupid. Riverside kids know which company abandoned their neighborhood." Elena stood abruptly. "I need to address this with the board. Ms. Whitmore, wait." But Elena was already gone, her mind racing through the implications. How many other families had her business decisions destroyed? How many Sandra Reeds were out there, casualties of quarterly profit reports she'd never questioned? The emergency board meeting convened at 4 p.m. Elena faced 12 well-dressed executives around the mahogany table where her father had once made similar decisions with similar certainty. "I want to discuss corporate responsibility," she began. "Specifically regarding the Riverside plant closure, and its ongoing impact on our employees. Board member Harrison Webb looked puzzled. Elena, that was 6 years ago. Ancient history. Not for Thomas Reed, Elena said, and explained what she'd learned. The reaction was swift and dismissive. This is unfortunate, said board member Patricia Lawson. But it's not our business what employees do off the clock. We can't be responsible for every personal tragedy that might somehow connect to business decisions. We employed his sister, Elena insisted. Our closure contributed directly to the conditions that. Contributed? Marcus Kellerman laughed. Elena, correlation isn't causation. We can't run a company based on what might happen to former employees who make poor life choices. Poor life choices? Elena's voice rose. She was working multiple jobs trying to survive after we eliminated her livelihood. Elena, Webb said condescendingly, your father understood that business requires tough decisions. You can't let emotion cloud your judgment. We're not a charity. What if we expanded our employee assistance programs? Elena suggested. Childcare support, housing assistance. Absolutely not. Lawson cut her off. That sets a dangerous precedent. Next thing you know, every employee will claim they need special help. We're here to run a business, not adopt our workforce. Elena looked around the table at faces that mirrored her own from just days ago, successful, confident, completely insulated from the human cost of their decisions. These people would never see Thomas as anything more than a line item in a budget, never understand that behind every efficiency report were real families, real lives, real children who needed their Uncle Tommy to count pennies for bread and milk. This conversation isn't over, Elena said quietly. Actually, Webb replied, it is. You're emotionally compromised, Elena. Take a few days, get some perspective. As Elena left the boardroom, she realized with crystal clarity that perspective was exactly what she'd gained. The question was what to do with it. Saturday afternoon found Elena sitting in her BMW outside Thomas's duplex, gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor her to sanity. She'd spent 2 sleepless nights crafting this moment, but now that she was here, every word she'd planned seemed inadequate. The neighborhood looked different in daylight, not threatening, just tired. Children rode bicycles on cracked sidewalks while their parents worked in small gardens, coaxing life from stubborn soil. This was a community that refused to surrender, even when the world had written them off. Elena took a deep breath and walked up the sagging front steps. Before she could knock, the door opened, revealing Thomas in weekend clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt that made him look younger, more approachable. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm when he recognized her. Ms. Whitmore? He stepped outside quickly, pulling the door closed behind him. Is everything all right? Did something happen at the office? No, nothing's wrong. Elena realized she'd never felt this nervous before a conversation in her life. I was hoping we could talk. Thomas's eyes narrowed with the wariness of someone who'd learned that unexpected visits from authority figures rarely brought good news. Are you from the county? Because I told Ms. Patterson that the paperwork is still processing, and the kids are fine. I'm not from the county, Thomas. I'm here as myself. Elena. Just Elena. With respect, Ms. Whitmore, there's no such thing as just Elena when you're my boss's boss's boss. His voice was careful, controlled. What do you want? Inside the house, Elena could hear the sounds of Saturday afternoon, children's voices, cartoons on television, the ordinary chaos of family life. Thomas positioned himself between her and that warmth, a human shield protecting something precious. I know about the children, Elena said gently. Thomas went very still. I don't know what you think you know, but 5 kids. Sandra's children. You've been raising them since she died. Elena watched his face carefully. I know about the custody proceedings, about why you work nights, about why you moved them out of Riverside. For a moment, Thomas looked like he might run. Then his shoulders sagged, and Elena saw the exhaustion he'd been carrying alone for over a year. How? It doesn't matter how. What matters is that I want to help. Help? Thomas laughed bitterly. You want to help? Then don't fire me. Don't report this to CPS. Just let me keep working and taking care of my family. That's not. Because that's what this is about, right? You found out your janitor is some kind of charity case, and now you're here to clean up the mess? Make it go away quietly? The pain in his voice stopped Elena cold. Thomas, no. That's not why I'm here. Then why? His voice cracked slightly. Why is Elena Whitmore standing on my porch on a Saturday afternoon? Because I guarantee it's not because you suddenly care about the help. The help? Elena repeated. That's what we are to you people, isn't it? The help. Invisible until we become inconvenient. Thomas's composure was fracturing. Do you have any idea what it's like to count every penny, to choose between groceries and school supplies, to lie awake wondering if you're enough for 5 kids who've already lost everything? Elena felt tears threatening. I'm starting to understand. No, you're not. Thomas's voice rose, then he caught himself, glancing back at the door. You drive a car that costs more than I make in 2 years. You live in a penthouse. You've never had to choose between heating and food, never had to explain to a 6-year-old why there's no birthday party this year. You're right, Elena said quietly. I don't understand your life. But I understand that my company, my decisions, help create the situation you're fighting against. Thomas stared at her. What are you talking about? The Riverside plant. We closed it 6 years ago. Sandra worked there. The color drained from Thomas's face. I signed the closure order. I didn't think about the families, the community, the ripple effects. I just saw numbers on a spreadsheet. Elena's voice broke. I'm responsible for what happened to Sandra, to the kids, to you. Thomas leaned against the porch railing, processing this revelation. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. So this is guilt. You want to throw some money at the poor black man to make yourself feel better? No, Elena said firmly. I want to do something that should have been done years ago. I want to create programs that support our employees, all of them. Affordable childcare, extended healthcare coverage for dependents, housing assistance. Not charity, Thomas. Justice. Justice? Thomas looked skeptical. You work 40 hours a week keeping our building spotless. You show up every night, you do excellent work, you ask for nothing. You deserve a living wage, benefits that cover your family, support that acknowledges your value as a human being. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. And what do you get out of this? A chance to sleep at night knowing I'm not profiting off other people's misery. The front door opened, and a teenage boy peeked out. Uncle Tommy? Everything okay? Everything's fine, Marcus, Thomas said softly. Go back inside. The boy studied Elena with intelligent eyes before disappearing back into the house. Thomas watched him go with an expression of fierce protectiveness. If I accept your help, Thomas said finally, it can't be just for me. There are others, single mothers, older workers, people struggling just like I am. If you really want justice, it has to be for everyone. Elena nodded. Agreed. And I want to be involved in designing these programs. Not just as a recipient, but as someone who understands what people actually need. Of course. Thomas studied her face for a long moment. Why do I feel like I'm about to make a deal with the devil? Despite everything, Elena smiled. Because maybe you are. But maybe the devil is ready to change. 6 months later, the Whitmore Industries holiday party looked different than it had in decades. For the first time in the company's history, the executive ballroom buzzed with voices from every level of the organization, not just the C-suite crowd in designer suits, but maintenance workers, cafeteria staff, security guards, and their families. Elena stood near the entrance, greeting employees she now knew by name. There was Maria from accounting, whose daughter was thriving in the new on-site childcare program. James from security, who'd finally been able to afford his diabetes medication thanks to the expanded healthcare coverage. Sarah from marketing, whose elderly mother now received support through the Elder Care Assistance Program. Ms. Whitmore, A small voice piped up near her elbow. Elena looked down to see Destiny, Thomas's youngest niece, wearing a red velvet dress that probably came from the children's clothing fund Elena had quietly established. "Uncle Tommy said I should thank you for the Christmas presents." Elena knelt down to Destiny's level. "Did you like the art supplies? I drew you a picture." Destiny thrust a crayon drawing into Elena's hands, a stick figure woman in a business suit standing next to a stick figure man holding the hands of 5 smaller figures. "That's you and Uncle Tommy and all of us." "It's beautiful," Elena said, meaning it. "I'm going to frame this for my office." "Really?" Destiny's gap-toothed grin could have powered the entire building. "Really?" Elena looked up to see Thomas approaching, wearing a new suit that fit him properly, a far cry from the worn uniform he'd once hidden behind. His new title, Facilities Manager, came with a salary that let him buy peanut butter without counting pennies, but more importantly, it came with respect and recognition for the intelligence he'd always possessed. "Destiny, what did I tell you about bothering Ms. Whitmore?" Thomas said gently. "She's not bothering me," Elena assured him. "We were just discussing her artwork." Over Thomas's shoulder, Elena could see the other children scattered throughout the party. Marcus, now 16, was talking animatedly with some of the younger executives about the coding classes offered at the new Riverside Community Learning Center. Keisha was showing off her honor roll certificate to anyone who would listen. The twins, Jamal and Malik, were loading their plates with more food than they'd probably seen in one place during their early years with Uncle Tommy. "They look happy," Elena observed. "They are happy," Thomas said, and Elena heard wonder in his voice, as if he still couldn't quite believe their circumstances had changed. "Marcus wants to study computer science now. Says he's going to design programs that help kids like us." "Kids like us?" Thomas smiled. His words. "He's proud of where he comes from now, instead of ashamed. That's worth more than all the programs we've created." "The programs?" Elena's chest swelled with pride when she thought about what they'd accomplished together. The Employee Family Support Initiative had expanded beyond anything she'd originally envisioned. The Riverside factory, once a symbol of corporate abandonment, now housed a community learning center, job training programs, and small business incubators. Property values were rising, businesses were returning, and the neighborhood Sandra Reed had died and was slowly healing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena's voice carried across the ballroom as she took the microphone. The crowd quieted, conversations fading to expectant silence. 6 months ago, I asked myself a question that changed everything. What does it mean to be successful if success comes at the expense of others' dignity? She found Thomas in the crowd, saw him nod encouragingly. "Tonight, I want to formally introduce you to someone who's helped me find the answer. Thomas Reed started here as our night janitor, but his real job, his most important job, was raising 5 children who'd lost their mother. He never asked for special treatment, never demanded recognition. He just worked, sacrificed, and loved those kids with everything he had." Elena gestured for Thomas to join her. He hesitated, then walked forward with the quiet confidence she'd watched him develop over the past months. "Thomas is now our facilities manager, but more than that, he's proof that when we invest in people, really invest in them, everyone benefits. The programs we've launched this year haven't just changed lives. They've changed our company culture, our community, and our understanding of what corporate responsibility really means." The applause was thunderous. Elena watched board members who'd initially resisted her initiatives, Webb, Lawson, even Marcus Kellerman, clapping with genuine enthusiasm. Success had a way of converting skeptics. As the evening wound down, Elena found herself on the executive floor balcony, looking out at the city lights. Thomas joined her, both of them comfortable in the silence that had replaced their initial wariness. "Do you think she would have been proud?" Thomas asked quietly. "Sandra, I mean. Of who the kids are becoming? I think she would be proud of who you became," Elena replied. "You saved those children, Thomas. You saved them, and in doing so, you saved me too." An hour later, Elena watched from her office window as Thomas walked his children through the same streets where she'd first followed him. But this time, there was no urgency in his step, no worried counting of pennies. The children skipped and laughed around him, secure in the knowledge that Uncle Tommy would always come home to them, would always be enough. Elena pressed her hand against the window, watching until they disappeared around the corner. Tomorrow, she would continue the work, expanding programs, changing policies, proving that profit and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. Her father's company had been built on the belief that some people mattered more than others. Elena was determined to build a legacy on the radical idea that everyone mattered exactly the same amount. In the reflection of the glass, she saw not Richard Whitmore's daughter, but Elena, a woman who'd learned that true leadership meant seeing the invisible, lifting up the overlooked, and understanding that the measure of success wasn't what you accumulated, but what you shared. The city sparkled below, full of stories waiting to be discovered, full of people waiting to be seen. Elena Whitmore was finally ready to see them all.